Welcome back to Sociology 227. This is Maria Gabrielle's Swora video 2. In this video I've got three goals. First, I'm going to introduce you to the contemporary sociology of religion. Next, I'll give you three examples to make sense of that. Finally, I'll get you ready for your two-paragraph response. Let's do it. While we're looking to new ways of thinking about religion, I want you to keep in mind the classical focus on practice, situated individualism, and meaning before truth. Though we are looking to new figures in sociological theory, we're going to attend to those problems in new ways. First, Michel Foucault. As I noted before, Foucault is interested in discourses that constitute subjects. Foucault's interest in religion refers both to the history in which people have been governed, like a shepherd over her flock, and in the particular ways that you and I come to tell the truth to ourselves and constitute ourselves as subjects. How do I come to know who I am in a spiritual way? This is a Foucauldian question. Here it is important that we don't try and debunk those truths. What matters is that people take them to be truthful under particular circumstances, and that these circumstances come to reflect the kinds of people that we want to be. These techniques of truth-telling, Foucault would call technologies of the self. That is, the way that we come to understand ourselves and how we dwell with these truths in our lives. In the readings this week, for example, we can talk about the truths people tell about AA and the ways they come to cultivate themselves as alcoholics in recovery. The Foucauldian approach analyzes both the ways that we shape alcoholism as an object of knowledge and how people operate on themselves as a particular kind of subject, as recovering alcoholics. Next, Pierre Bourdieu. Bourdieu is a thinker addressing questions of position and disposition, how we act in relation to inequality. How do we act in social fields, in various sites of the symbolic economy? And how, in that case, do we incorporate these particular techniques into our mundane practices? Bourdieu is interested in the symbolic value we come to attribute to things, the sacred included, and how we come to adopt these techniques as habitual. In religious practice, just like on the sporting field, we employ symbolic capital. This means both that we try to navigate that field in ways that reflect inequality, but also that dwelling within that sphere becomes a place of routine, pre-reflective action. In religious life, we find another form of practical know-how, a site of position and disposition. This will become very clear in the next example. Finally, Merleau-Ponty. We talked about Merleau-Ponty in the video on Sarah Ahmed. If you recall, Merleau-Ponty wrote The Phenomenology of Perception, arguing that our worldly existence takes shape in our body. He argues that the way we dwell in the body is a space of collective meaning. When we think about religious practice, we can think about particular social meanings we attribute to parts of the body, to the ways we feel the sacred in our bones during a religious ceremony. Think crying at a wedding, and the ways the symbolic is lived meaningfully. These are all phenomenological questions which we can explore with Merleau-Ponty, asking how our bodies breathe life into the world and how we live it meaningfully through them. Let me give you an example that brings those last two guys together. The first case study I wanted to look at is the work of Tom Jordache in his Anthropology of Faith Healing, or Charismatic Healing as you see here. In his work, this is his 1997 book, Jordache explores the acts of healing taking place in Pentecostal Catholicism in the United States. I'm sure you've all seen TV shows where people attend a giant church and receive healing in front of the congregation. Well, Jordache is interested not in asking whether or not religious healing works, but rather how people come to feel as though it works. Swora also makes reference to his work in her piece you read this week. In applying Bourdieu and Merleau-Ponty, Jordache is asking how people come to find meaningful solace in the practice of faith healing, how they afford religious significance to what others would come to understand as solely medical or otherwise non-religious phenomena. Like the anthropological work that Durkheim used in the elementary forms, Jordache is asking how we come to constitute the self as a sacred object. Like Weber, Jordache is interested in charismatic authority. How do we come and view the faith healer as a legitimate authority? And how does this impact social action? And very much unlike Marx, Jordache is asking us to accept that people really do feel better after undergoing charismatic healing. This isn't about ideology, because people truly do believe they are healed. The social science of religion question is, why? In the paper I've quoted here, Jordache looks to charismatic healing in three forms. They are physical healing, whereby a practitioner applies charismatic healing to address a physical health issue. Healing of memories, whereby people use charismatic healing to cure matters of the soul. And deliverance, where a practitioner identifies demons which reside in an individual's subconscious or soul and removes them to spiritual effect. Just like the classic sociology of religion, Jordache brackets the ultimate truth of the situation. Are demons real? And explores how people come to understand them as real. Using Bourdieu, he is interested in how we come to practice these meanings and establish their significance in a particular symbolic order. Important here is his use of Merleau-Ponty and the ways in which we dwell in our body. People feel and live better after undergoing faith healing, he argues, because of how we live in our bodies. Our perception of them shapes our bodily experience. He is trying to explain why people do feel better after having their demons removed. The point, then, is to explain how people really do experience transformation in charismatic healing as a bodily and symbolic experience. Let's look to Suarez's Ethnography of Alcoholics Anonymous. We can see the same work being done in Suarez's Anthropology of Alcoholics Anonymous in the readings assigned for this week. Note, I'd like to tell you more about her, but I couldn't find anything out. I'll focus on it just for a bit, since you already read it. As in the classic sociology of religion, the focus here is on practice. Swora notes that many academics have criticized the spiritual nature of Alcoholics Anonymous, but her goal isn't to see if people are following the rules. Rather, she wants to see how, by following people around, they make those rules their own, and how they alter their lives around their practice. Like Durkheim's analysis of rites of passage in the Australian example, and like Jordache's example of faith healing, Swora explores how the recovered alcoholic is a new kind of person. What are the processes whereby we become a recovering alcoholic, and how do we take stock of our lives before and after? Here, the classic focus on individualism as a social product is found anew. We can call all of the little ways we become a new person a technology of the self, to quote Foucault. These are techniques performed alone and in the group through which we tell the truth about ourselves. Okay, maybe you haven't gone to AA meetings or had your demons removed. I'll give you a more popular example. In the reboot to Queer Eye, I want to argue that we have another space where the sacred is deployed. Durkheim wants to make a distinction between the sacred and the profane, the religious and the non-religious. But Jordache and Swora argue that we can do without the non-sacred. The chief sociological task is explaining what counts as sacred and how we come to imbue things with symbolic importance. Though there isn't anything about religion in Queer Eye, at least the episodes that I've seen, there is a symbolic value placed on embodied practices and aspects of life in self-care. While we might not be addressing religion in this sense, I want to argue that self-cultivation, in Queer Eye, is another space where we perform rites and rituals and tell the truth about ourselves. While we might claim that particular societies are more secular, in that they aren't explicitly religious, in any society where we organize ritual practices of the self, I want to argue that we are deploying the sacred. So when Jonathan instructs people on little bodily rituals they are to do in the morning, or when Karamo sits down with them to reorganize their social lives, these too are practices that constitute the self as an object of sacred symbolic value. So while at first sight this might look like a completely different example than the work that Weber or Durkheim did, I think it exemplifies exactly what they are talking about. The self as a sacred object. Finally, I'd like you to think about other places where you make collective meaning and where the sacred is deployed. The classical sociologists were all wondering what was going to happen as we made the transition from traditional social order to a modern industrial one. Durkheim and Weber, for instance, were both terrified about a move to the modern city, one that would erode the hold that traditional meaning structures had on collective morality. Marx saw it as a move from one form of oppression to another. Contemporary social theories of religion, like the one you read today, are less concerned with the "will society stick together without religion?" question, and are more interested in the ways that we make meaning together, in both organized religion and other spaces where we pursue ritual acts. Contemporary theorists ask about the ways we make meaning in a decline of dominant religion, and the ways in which those traditional religions adapt to this so-called secular age. I say so-called because we might ask what exactly that term means. The dictionary reads, not overtly or specifically spiritual. In the sense of the number of churches and mosques around here, then yes. They are in decline and society is becoming more secular. Now all the old churches are getting turned into bougie condos, co-working spaces, and CrossFit gyms. You gotta join, bro. But looking to the themes of the lecture today, think about society's focus on ritual, embodied existence, and meaning. In all of these places, replacing traditional religious buildings, we find similar investments of meaning in ritual practices. This isn't to say we need to celebrate all these different ways people make meaning. I don't think there's anything good about a bunch of oversized white wine glasses that say namaste on them, lining the shelves of HomeSense, but that these forms of spirituality are present in Canadian society. The point of the piece assigned today is not just that Alcoholics Anonymous is a spiritual manner for people to stop drinking, but also that the various adherents to the 12-step program find their own ways to make sense of the doctrine. They define what a higher power is, and they decide what exactly constitutes a moral inventory, and what they believe they need to apologize for when they hit rock bottom. These are what Foucault calls technologies of the self, or what Jordache would call the sacred self. If you think about the different ways we create meaningful rituals and tell the truth about ourselves through collective practices, then our society isn't really secular at all. The point is that yoga, spin class, and CrossFit all fill the same basic human needs that Durkheim discussed, and can be studied through the same perspective. Now, they might all be wrenched from the original cultural context, for good or for ill, but they are important to us because of that need. So, Durkheim was right. That's it for me. In 2 paragraphs between 5 to 8 sentences in length, and with reference to the readings, 1. Explain how the sacred is mobilized in the AA recovery process. 2. Do this with another contemporary example not found in the lecture videos. See you next week.